Hey Harvest, we have been given an awesome grant of $10,000 from Converge Mid-America. That's so amazing. And what they're giving us that $10,000 for is for a launch fund, meaning to get all of the things necessary for our kids ministry, for our signage, our setup, our tear down, coffee, tables, all types of things, some things for tech to help us launch Harvest Church. And so what I want us to do is see if we can take that 10,000 and turn it into 20 or 25,000. And so all of that money would go toward the materials that we need to launch successfully. And you guys have already been super generous. Thank you so much for your giving over the last 3 months. I mean, it's been unbelievable. And so this is a way that I just want to come and say, hey, here's a challenge. Let's take the 10,000 and let's make it into 20 or to 25,000. Some of the ways that you can give is this. You can go to harvest.247 and go to the giving page, and you can click the to give. And if you want to give to what we're calling the launch fund, you can hit the drop down box, click launch, and it'll go right for launch, and it will be spent for launch. Another way you can do that is you can go on your app, and you can give it on the app as well. This is a unique opportunity for us to really be able to launch well, to be able to get all of the necessary things that we need to give people an incredible, authentic experience with Jesus when they come and visit Harvest Church for the first time. And so what I'd ask you to do is just prayerfully consider giving an offering to this fund. And as you continue to tithe and you continue to give, just pray and see what God would give you. And so here's what I want to do. By August the 14th, we'd like to see those funds come in. And so Converge has pledged to give us that $10,000. And so by August the 14th, we would like to be able to multiply that from 10 to 20 to possibly $25,000 to help cover our launch cost as we move forward and get ready to launch Harvest Church. Thanks so much for prayerfully considering participating, and thank you so much for your generosity. Well, hey, I hope you guys are doing great tonight. Really looking forward to talking to you today about Program Church and Pathway Church. But I have a question to start. Have you ever been so overwhelmed you just don't know what to do? So one of the issues that we have in our house with 3 young kids is that they just talk over each other. And one will start talking, the other will start talking, the other gets a thought, and they'll start talking. And here's the problem with that. It's very difficult to understand them. They are talking about different activities. It seems as if there are no clear priorities, and there's definitely unclear communication. And it just seems like a bunch of noise coming at you, and you almost don't know what to do in that moment without saying stop, and I need one person to talk at a time. When you get in these scenarios, when I get in these scenarios, when Sarah gets in these scenarios, is oftentimes very overwhelming. And here's what I'd say. Sometimes church can be the same way. There's so many activities, there's unclear priorities, and there's competing communication. And so what I wanted to do is share something with you that I learned here recently about church, and what I would say is a program church, meaning a church that is driven by programs. And we're all familiar with it. I've pastored churches like this, built churches like this. It's just what we've come to know. But a program church has a lot of things, okay? You've got a VBS. Don't hate VBS, just you have VBS. You got a seniors activity so that all of our senior citizens can come together. You've got a men's activity. You've got a women's activity. You've got a knitting class. You've got a Sunday school kickoff. That you've got going on. You've got a youth camp or youth trip that's happening. Aunt Margaret, that's been in the church for 90 years, at Christmas time always does her Christmas cookie bake-off. So of course you've got the cookie bake-off, you know that. And if you like those things, I'm not trying to, put that in the dirt. I'm just saying this is reality. And then you've got your one time a month gathering. You've got your deacon meeting. You've got all of these various types of programs. And here's the thing. Program churches, which honestly is most of the churches that we see, most of the churches that we know, most of the churches that we've been in, accomplish three things, or maybe not accomplish three things. One is they're activities driven. There's so many activities that they want to get more and more people into activities. We want to get the kids into VBS, the men into men's group, the women's into women's group, the Wednesday night thing, or the Sunday night thing, or the Tuesday night thing, and then we want to get everybody into the Sunday school, the knitting class, all that kind of stuff. So we're activities driven. The end goal is to get people into activities. There's competing communication. I don't know that if you know this, but if you've ever done announcements in a church and you have, right before you're about to get up, 4 people come up and say, hey, will you remember to announce this? Hey, will you remember to announce that? There's competing communication. And there are some just really hilarious stories about people getting angry because you didn't communicate their activity, their event, you forgot, you didn't get the information or whatnot. And so you've got competing communication because everybody wants their thing communicated from the front because it gives it prominence. You've got competing communication. And then, but here's the other thing. You've got unclear priorities. Because which one gets the priority? Which one's more important than the other? And how do you determine? Because if you determine that youth camp's more important than the cookie cook-off, well, man, I mean, we've been doing this for 80 years. I mean, and the youth pastor just got here 2 years ago. I mean, which one's more important? So what I'm saying is that this is oftentimes what we experience in churches, and this is what we call a program church. It's a philosophy of how to get people engaged. Doesn't mean it's bad. Doesn't mean that it's great. Doesn't mean that it's anything. But here's some statistics that I just would like to share with you, just to think about this. If we were to look at the state of the church today in the United States of America, what we would find is that there are about 3% of the churches in America that are growing. So about 350,000 churches exist in America. There's 3% of those that are growing. There's 1% of those that are growing by conversion. Most of the churches, as a matter of fact, Gary McIntosh, who is a professor at Biola, he was one of my professors, in one of his books, Taking Your Church to the Next Level, he said that about 85% of churches in America are plateaued or declining. And so if the majority of our churches are built like this, what I would say is just a thought, just a question is, do we think that it's actually effective? Something that we might know, but is it effective? Well, I want to propose to you something maybe a little bit different today. Let me put my marker back up here. And I want to share with you something that Jesus did early on in his ministry, actually in Mark 1:16 through 17. 2 simple verses, 3 things that I want to pull out of it and talk then about a pathway church. And here's what it says, Mark 1:16 through 17. Passing alongside the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and Andrew. So Jesus saw Simon and Andrew, the brother of Simon, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And Jesus said to them, follow me, I will make you become fishers of men. That is his call. That is what he does. If you're in a boat, picture yourself, because I think sometimes we read these and with understanding the end of the story, but think about it. If you're in a boat and you're casting your net, or if you're at your job and you're doing your job, or you're out doing your activity, and somebody comes along, doesn't have any medals, doesn't show you their degree or their resume first, and says to you, hey, come and follow me, and I'm going to make you fishers of men. What is the chance that you would follow them? Probably not a great one. So here's some observation, those that I think are very, very important from what Jesus does. The first is that there was one step. follow me. He didn't say, well, you need to do this and this and this, and there's a prerequisite over here. No, he said, follow me. There was not a lot of language. There was not even a lot of persuasion. It's just one simple step. Follow me. How many times have we called people to follow our activities and neglected to teach them how to follow Jesus? Just a question to ponder. But here is something that we believe as a church. This is a core value for us at Harvest. We believe Jesus is the truth and that the truth sets you free. That's what we believe. Jesus says, I'm the way, I'm the truth, I'm the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And we believe that. And so when we look at something that's simple that Jesus does, he says, follow me. Here's what we want to do. We want to teach people to follow Jesus, because when we follow Jesus, it leads us away from other things. And so in the call to Simon and Andrew, there is one simple step: follow me. Number two, the next step was clear. I'm going to make you into something. So follow me. Why should we follow you? Because I'm about to make you into something. They knew that they were going to have a purpose in what Jesus had called them to. So if they take the first step, they know that it's going to lead them to a next step. When you say that you're going to be called into something, it means that you're going to be transformed. Jesus always wants transformation. He is always after change. Which brings me to another core value. We embrace change to discover what's next to advance the kingdom. Why? Because change brings opportunity. Every time, think about it in your life, every time that God has changed something in your life, changed you, changed your perspective, whatever, He is bringing to you a new opportunity. When He makes the call to Simon and Andrew, He is giving them a new opportunity. He's saying it's a very simple step, follow me, but it's a simple next step because it was clear, because I'm about to transform you. I'm going to make you, mold you, shape you into something. It also goes back to a ministry philosophy for us at Harvest Church, which is discipleship. Which means that we want to, empowerment matters. We will empower today those who will lead us tomorrow. It is so important in a church to make disciples and to be intentional about making disciples. I know that we talk a lot about it in church. Church is always, hey, here's a plan, here's this, here's that. But we have to be so intentional about making disciples. And so what Jesus is doing is He's about to transform these fishermen from fishing to being fishers of men, because discipleship was the priority. That's the third point that we can pull out of this. Fishers of men was the priority for the transformation. Meaning He says, follow me, because I'm going to transform you into being something, and that something is fishers of men. He's calling them to a next step that is very clear, with an end goal, with a purpose of multiplication. Jesus told them the end game. Often in church, we don't have an end game. So oftentimes the end game is to get them to VBS, to get them to the next activity, get them to the next activity. We just do activity over and over and over again without ever evaluating what we do. Is it working? Why are we doing it? When are we doing it? How are we doing it? When did we start? Should we end it? Should we tweak it? All that. So oftentimes we don't have an end game. But Jesus had an end game: to make disciples. And He has an end game for us: to make disciples. And so what you see is that Jesus, with this one statement, verse 17, there was one clear step. It was a next step that was extremely clear, and that discipleship was the priority. He had an end game in mind. I have a friend of mine, David Nelms. He is the founder of the Timothy Initiative. David pastored a mega church, multiple campuses in Florida for a long time. And one of the stories that he told me was, he said, Josh, I realized one day, I don't know that we're fulfilling the Great Commission. We have a lot of things going on. We're really, really big. We've got a lot of people. We've got a big budget. We've got all the latest, greatest worship music. We've got all the great activities, the best BBS in town, all of these things. But I had to just say, I don't know that we were making disciples. I don't know that I was pastoring a church that was doing what Jesus called us to do. At Harvest Church, we want to have a very clear priority. And that is this: to multiply believers, to multiply disciple makers, and to multiply church plants. And so with that, we want to move away from a program church into what I'm going to call a pathway church. And so this is what that means. A pathway church has more people taking a step. We want you to take a step. If it's somebody's first time, we have a next step for them. If you've been there for 2 months, we have a next step for you. If you want to get into leadership and know how to be in leadership and know how to grow in leadership and all that, we have a next step for you. We want you to take the next step. The other thing, though, that we want is that we want the next step to be very clear. We want there to be a clear next step. We don't want you to be wondering about, well, what do I do next? Or how do I do this? Or do I have to serve in one role for 9 years before I can do anything else? No, we want to have a very clear next step. And here's the thing. We want to make discipleship a priority. We want it to be a priority. And so what that looks like is this. In the next Harvest Home, we're going to talk about 6 habits of people who grow with Jesus. And so I'm going to list 3 on there. But we're going to make a next step, meaning if there's a salvation, then the next step is baptism. And then the next step is serving. And the next step is giving. And the next step is groups. And the next step is multiply. That's it. That's it. Not a lot of programs, not a lot of things, but a very clear next step. And some of these things can happen all at the same time or simultaneously, but we want to make sure that we are a pathway church, that we are making disciples, and we have a very clear next step. Why? Because we want people to know Jesus and grow with Him. That's what we want them to do. We want them to know Jesus, be saved, and then we want Him to grow with them through baptism all the way to multiplication. And so there are 3 pathways at Harvest. One is a connection pathway for first-time guests and guests that track along the way. There's a growth pathway that'll be in video, and we may even have live classes to help people move from one step to the next in their growth with Jesus. And there's a leadership pathway. Why? Because we want people to know Jesus and grow with Him. And so it's just simple. We want to move away from program church and into pathway church that prioritizes a very, very simple step, a clear next step, and discipleship, make discipleship a priority. If you want to hear more about this, we actually have a Behind the Harvest podcast on program church versus pathway church. Just go to Google Play or podcast on Apple, and you can look up that. It is simply Behind the Harvest, titled Path Church or Program Church. Which one do you prefer? And you can listen to a little bit more in-depth discussion about that. But I want to lead you in one final story. I was hiking up my first 14,000-foot mountain called Mount Bierstadt in Colorado. And if you don't know me, I have been afraid of heights my whole life. I couldn't sit in the upper deck at a stadium. I didn't like to look down on things. I've been really, really afraid of heights. Well, Mount Bierstadt is a pretty simple 14,000-foot mountain to climb, if that makes any sense. For some of you, 14,000 feet seems very difficult, but it's one of the more simpler ones. And so the whole time we're working our way up this mountain, crawling through rocks and climbing on all this kind of stuff, and taking this nice path all the way up. And all of a sudden I step up from the last rock, and I'm up on top of this mountain, not at the summit, but on top of this mountain, and there's nothing above me. and the wind is blowing, and the birds are chirping, and I can see the clouds building in the background, and I am just paralyzed. Couldn't move. I'm so afraid. I can look a little bit over and see the drop off on the other side. I can look off to my left and see the slope that's a drop off on one side. And I'm like, man, I cannot move. I am so afraid. And I remember this moment that was so impactful for me. The guy that I was hiking with had hiked all the 14,000 foot mountains in Colorado. And he turned around and he looked and he saw me and he said, Josh, I want you to do this. I want you to narrow your focus and follow me. I want you to block out everything else that's happening. I want you to put your head down, look at the back of my shoes, and follow me. We're 50 feet from the summit. And so I narrowed my focus, and trembling, I walked that 50 feet just looking at the back of Jim's boots. Jesus says to his disciples, follow me. And when he talks to his church, I believe he's saying, narrow your focus. Yeah, there's all this stuff out here. But narrow your focus and follow me. And teach others to do the same. We want people to know Jesus and grow with him at Harvest Church. And that's why, philosophically, we want to be a Pathway church. Have a great night.